I thank you again. And okay. So
Larry, it's so great to see you.
Oh,
Thanks for making the trip, buddy. And you too, David. Good to see you. Haven't seen you guys in a while. Wonderful to be working together on this new project. And hey, our original project, Ice Fishing in America, perfect.
well, you're kind to say that.
I am. That was very kind. I didn't mean it.
Excellent. There we go. So, why was ice fishing in America worth doing from your point of view?
Well, this is such an extraordinary time in the history of our country. And it's not a good time. Everybody knows that. And I believe that artists have a sincere and extravagant public responsibility. I don't think that as an artist, you actually have the right to ignore what's happening. We depend, as musicians, on the airwaves. That's how we get our music out. Obviously also in person, obviously face-to-face, but the DJs, who have been quite wonderful about ice fishing in America, they are on the public airwaves. The airwaves are not private. They belong to all of us. And because we are depending on the public, and because we are human creatures in this world, which is so troubled here in the United States, where we live, here around the world, I believe we have a moral responsibility to raise our voices in truth. And sometimes that means in the truth of lifting up the absolutely extraordinary people from little country towns to major cities in this United States who are raising their voices, who are putting their lives on the line, who are saying no to authoritarianism, no to a dictator, no to corruption. So I think Ice Fishing in America does a great job. I think you contributed some wonderful songs of your own. You and I were definitely on a roll writing songs together. And in my great hope, I don't expect that Trump is going to listen to, Trump Gone to Mar-a-Lago. I don't think that, but I do think, and this is my sense of for whom we made this album, that it will lift the spirits, strengthen the hearts, and just keep our friends, our neighbors, those with whom we are in solidarity, in resistance to a fascist regime. I hope it helps them keep going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, man. So, how do you decide whether songs should be more sketch comedic or anthem-like and hard-hitting?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever made that decision. I mean, sometimes something is just so obvious, it cries out for parody, it cries out for sarcasm. But I myself believe that to be a political artist is to refuse self-censorship. That's the first thing. Let the censors do their jobs. They probably couldn't get any other jobs if people do what they've been doing. They need the money. But let them tell us no. We should not tell ourselves no. And I know a lot of artists say, oh, but if I'm political, I won't get airplay. If I'm political, I won't be able to get booked. Pete Seeger did fine. Utah Phillips did fine. Sweet Honey and the Rock did fine. The history of, and I might add, Woody Guthrie did fine. Mm-hmm. He wasn't exactly appreciated everywhere. I'm sure he was subject to some blacklist. Whose songs do we sing today? Come on. So, but then I think it's extraordinarily important not only to be against. So, for example, sometimes I'm doing a radio interview and somebody will say, so you're a protest singer. I'm like, well, there are actually more things that I am for than things I'm against. Of course I'm against corruption. Of course I'm against cutting food programs. But mostly I'm for a lot of stuff. I'm for every kid should get a great education. I'm for people should be able to go to college free, like every other industrial nation in the world does. I think, of course, there should be health care for everyone. It's good for everybody. It's really good for everybody. Of course, there should be good jobs, dignified retirement. Of course, we should protect the environment. Of course, we should make the oceans safe. These are in the self-interest of everybody. So I refuse the image of protest singer, even though sometimes I am protesting. Then they say, well, but you're a struggle singer. I'm like, if you ever tried to write songs, it's a struggle, right? And then they move on. Then they say, well, okay, maybe a topical singer. And then I said, no, that's Jimmy Buffett. That buys me at least 15 seconds. So yeah, so I try to lay out a vision of wonderful humanity. I try to pay tribute to the people who quietly or noisily put themselves on the line. I write songs about teachers. I write songs about first responders. I write songs about people who coach Little League. This is part of the fabric of a good society. So, but I think I would have a very hard time writing a love song for Trump. I don't think that's going to work, It's just not going. But I guess I would say there's sometimes when I just think, oh, there's a song there waiting to be written. I mean, this is a good example is ice fishing in America. I'm like, and by the way, for your listeners, it's ICE capitalized. I don't know. I just like, I used to fish. I used to have a 10-foot John boat. I used to flat bottom boat. I used to fit inside my Dodge van. I had a 3.5 horse outboard, 3.5 horsepower outboard motor. And after work, I'd go out and get on the lake and bass fish. You love it, And but Minnesota is nothing but lakes. There's barely any land left. There's like 4 acres that are not water in Minnesota. So, and I think ice fishing. It just, how could I not, right? And I did a little research. It was very interesting. I'm like, I love the internet, and so like, oh my God, it actually has over 1,000 lakes. That's a lot of lakes. Any way you cut it. And then I looked up what kind of fish are up there? I don't really know. My fishing has mostly been either in Pennsylvania for trout when I was a kid, or southern for bass. Sometimes catfish, something like that. But I'm like, I have no idea what kind of fish. Turns out there's 80 different species in that lake, including giant sturgeon. I had no idea. That sturgeon can live to 100 years old. I hope they're in good health. I hope that they don't have arthritis. I mean, got a sturgeon arthritis. What are they going to do? And they grow to like something like 800 pounds. Okay, I am not going swimming in Minneapolis, so I've got so here's sort of like, okay, so here's somebody fishing for ice, for ice ages, right? Here's the frozen lake. Here's the hole. What happens? A giant sturgeon jumps out and tries to run him over, right? And says, tried to run me, one time I was fishing, and a giant sturgeon jumped out of the hole, tried to run me over, but I wasn't scared. I take my Glock everywhere I go. Now, if somebody doesn't figure out that we're talking about the ice agents, their brutality, their murderous intent, their lack of restraint, their disrespect for the law, well, I done my best.
You have, and I will add, aren't you afraid that you've never written a love song for Donald? Rhetorical question. Aren't you ashamed? That's a joke. Sorry. Don't mind me. I'm just over here in the wings. So,
well, Larry, that's actually an interesting idea. I will have to work on it, but maybe tonight I'll come up with something for you,
You definitely will.
Well, I think this is... What comes to mind immediately is, who loves Donald? Donald does. Right? Or maybe it's first person. I'm in love with myself. I look in the mirror. What a great guy. what a great guy. Good makeup artist, too. Oh, look at the hair. And I just had it dyed. I've already got the rhyme. That's how it works. And, and,
We're
and
living it in this moment. Thanks, man.
yeah. The other thing is, I often write a commission. Nobody's ever paid me, but they say, "Hey, Si, look way back before the internet, I had something I called songs by mail, but it wasn't actually by mail. People would call up literally and say, Si, we got to pick a line tomorrow. Can you get us a song?" And I'm like, "Tell me what I need to know. Tell me the details." Very specific, not generalized. And then I go to work and I sing it into their answering machine. It's, I understand that many people wait for inspiration. For me, as a songwriter, I'm a craftsperson. If you're a decent carpenter, which I used to be, I used to build furniture, I used to help build houses. You don't say to the straw boss, "Gosh, I just don't feel like hanging windows today." I think, I think I need to really go off and study a little bit more before I pick up my hammer. Like, are you on drugs? So I do think that professional songwriters, of which there are many, 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 can respond to specifics. So, and after all these years, I've got elaborated things that worked once, so I remember them. So, the song, I heard the wreck of the highway, but I didn't hear nobody pray. Great song, including the line, "There was whiskey and blood all together." I love that line, right? So I can imagine, so here's this young reporter on a county newspaper, and the editor says, "Hey, Larry, I just got a call. Somebody said that there was a wreck on the highway, maybe Highway 66, and the strange thing is that nobody who was watching heard anybody pray. I think we need to feature this. I think this is a lead. What you say in the newspaper business, if it bleeds, it leads, right?" And the young reporter says, "Wow, Moss, I don't know. I've been so fortunate. I've never been in a wreck. I've never seen a wreck. And I actually don't know anybody who drinks enough to have a wreck. And I faint at the sight of blood. So I don't really feel up to that. But I think if you could give me a couple of weeks off and I could go study the wreckology and maybe, go to a couple AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, and see what the dynamics are. And then I think I could write the story." And your editor is going to chop down at his cigar and say, "Are you on drugs? Do you actually want this job?" So there is a craft to songwriting. And, Felice and Bulu Bryant, who wrote, "Wake Up Little Susie" and other, they wrote 7,000 songs. They didn't say, "Oh, give me a couple of weeks to study whether it's difficult to wake up somebody named Susie."
Well said, man. Thanks. Just a couple more in the ice fishing zone. First thought, best thought. We love all of our children equally to the extent we can. But first thought, best thought, is there a favorite song for you on ice fishing in America?
Oh, I think ice fishing in America. I think that's really. I love Trump Gone Mar-a-Lago, and this is another thing. This is a song parody, right? It's I took an existing song, which is a wonderful, wonderful song by Eric Schmidt called Joshua Gone Barbados. It was about Ebenezer Joshua, who was the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Caribbean, and who was a major force for progressive politics, and also was in some ways the architect of Caribbean independence from the colonial powers that held the Caribbean forever. And Eric was down there with his family, and the song is beautiful. It's just beautiful. Unfortunately, he got it completely wrong, and it's Joshua Gone Barbados, staying in a big hotel. Well, it is true that during a strike, which Joshua was the head of the particular union of the Progressive People's Party that he had founded, went to Barbados during the strike. Why did he go? For a meeting of Caribbean leaders to create an anti-colonial agenda. So it's totally unfair. So I don't know, but it's just, I hope that some of the people who hear Trump Gone Mar-a-Lago which borrows some of, Eric von Schmidt's language and plays with it and added some other stuff. You added some great lines, right? The, the, the musical resonance will deepen the impact. Right? That's why we write parodies. And, I also, as you know, I also write for musical theater. And for my great friend, John McCutcheon, whom I met on a picket line, on the Brookside picket line in eastern Kentucky, 50 years ago on Thanksgiving. John had just come south, didn't know anybody. Nobody had asked him to Thanksgiving dinner. So he said, oh, check out the nearest picket line, right? And I wrote for John, I wrote a one-person show called Joe Hill's Last Will. And in it, the nice thing about writing music is I get people to say whatever I want them to say, right? It's a little easier than some things when they're dead. Executed judicially by the state of Utah in 1915. So at one point, Joe explains why he doesn't write original tunes for songs. He says something like, I was up in the Fraser River country, that's up in Canada, and, along 500 miles of railroad line, the railroad workers were all unionized. They laid down their tools and they folded their arms. He says, so, I went to the strike office, brought my pencil along, and I thought, what am I going to talk about? And I thought, so many of these workers are Irish. A lot of them left Ireland just ahead of the hangman. And I knew they would know the old Irish song, Where the Shannon River Flows. So I took that song, that tune, and I made it Where the Fraser River Flows. And I knew that when they heard it first, they'd be able to sing along. Now Joe Hill was with the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, the Wobblies, and they printed up little song sheets. Eventually they did a little songbook, small enough so that it could fit into workers' overalls. And because so many of these workers, they didn't speak English. So many of the Irish didn't speak English. They spoke Irish Gaelic at that point. And so they could read the words, but he said, I didn't have time to teach them a brand new tune. It wouldn't have worked. And I also knew that when we sang Where the Fraser River Flows, memories of Ireland would flood back. I would create an emotional response. And I think that writing new words to old songs, or partially new words, I think it's undervalued in the folk communities. Oh, you should do an original tune. I'm not sure there are any original tunes at this point. There's only 12 notes in a scale. What are you supposed to do? But it does create a emotional response. I was on the phone today with my pharmaceutical insurance company, right, that I get through Medicare, right? And I don't know how we got onto this, but I just explained to him, as I've explained to you, you want to know the words to any Christian hymn? Ask a small-town Jewish kid like me. Because we know them all, because we're kind of protective coloration. We're not that different, right? And he said, I said, so what's your favorite hymn? And he said, it's called There Is a River Filled with Blood. I'm like, you know what? I know that one, but I know it as a coal mining song written by Joan Boyd, and it goes, there is a river filled, there is a fountain filled with blood, the blood of our mining men so brave, but who worked together in the black coal pits, but who dug each other's graves, great God, but who dug each other's graves, but who worked together in the black coal pits, but who dug each other's graves. And it goes on to the children and the wives, for the husbands and sons, good mining men who are so senselessly untied. And then the last verse is, maybe a little bit off, apologies to Joan, there is a fountain filled with blood, the blood of our land and of our men. Let us stand beneath its powerful flood, be revived to fight and win. Well, probably most of the miners know that, regardless of which Christian denomination. It's a very common hymn. It's a beautiful hymn, a powerful hymn. so they could sing along. So I think that it's a very high art, and I wish more folk singers were less concerned with total originality and how do we get people to sing along.
Thanks. That's great. Anything else about ice fishing?
Well, I loved working with you on it. It was just great. I mean, talk about a couple of fools on the hill, man. We were on such a roll and things. I mean, I love the video that you made of the annual official White House lawn Easter Tesla roll. I mean, it's just completely hysterical. And I love the conceit. You know, it's like, wow, eggs are so expensive. You go in a store, can I have an egg? I say, sorry, we don't sell them by whole. We only sell them by half. You know, we put the yolk in a little plastic bag for you. And like, so you know, as I recall the lyrics you and I wrote, it was like, you know, eggs are so expensive. They're sold in halves, not whole. With the price of Teslas dropping fast. That's what we're going to roll. The conceit is that, you know, we're going to roll Teslas down. On Easter Sunday, we're just going to have a whole bunch of Teslas. We're going to roll them down until they drown in the Potomac River. And you did this thing that is so hysterical with your adoptive Tesla, right? And so, I mean, I just totally had a great time doing it. And, you know, it lifts my spirit. I feel like, you know, I spent 50 years as a civil rights and union organizer. I did my last campaign in Alaska, working to protect the world's richest remaining wild salmon fishery in Bristol Bay, which is I mean, it's in an inland ocean in Alaska. And, you know, I flew back and forth for 10 years and created an album of songs based on interviewing. I mean, I'm a musical journalist, right? I mean, when I was asked by a guy who fishes commercially in Bristol Bay, Dan Strickland, who's also a wonderful folk singer, to come write a theme song for the campaign to stop the proposed Pebble Mine, which, if built, would have been the largest open pit gold and copper mine in the world. Right, the largest gold and copper mine, open pit in the entire history of the world. And I didn't know it. I'd never been to Alaska. I never imagined going to Alaska. But, you know, I'm not going to turn that down. I just retired from 30 years directing a southern nonprofit called Grassroots Leadership, which did civil rights and union community organizing, still going very, very strong under young leadership. And I'm like, okay, why not? Let's go. But when I asked Dan Strickland as my inviter, and then I only knew one human being in Alaska whose name was Suzanne Little, who was a former state senator that I had met at a gathering in the Pacific Northwest for elected officials for the Pacific Northwest in Alaska, organized by something called the Western State Center, which is a kind of a progressive, it's like grassroots leadership. And I remembered her because her brother was playing guitar with Ricky Skaggs. So that's the kind of my musical Velcro. So, you know, when I get this email from Dan Strickland, he's like, come on, we can't pay you, you know, you got to get yourself here, but we'll feed you, he said, and we will promise you all the homemade beer you could drink. That was, and I said, and all of the smoked salmon you could eat. I'm like, oh, straight to my Jewish heart. You know, the bagels are terrible in Alaska. I'm just going to tell you, bring your own bagels, B-U-I-B. But I didn't know anything. But I basically said to Dan and Suzanne, you have to introduce me to people that I can interview. And based on those interviews, I will write the songs. I will then send them back for the people whom I interviewed to review. Because part of my ethics in songwriting is if I make it up, that's my business, right? But if I interview you and it's about you, you have the right to say, Si, I don't want that out there. And I will scrap it. Or you need to say, Si, you got some stuff wrong. I'd like you to fix it, right? So pretty much the entire album is based on musical journalism. And I think my favorite moment, I was in Dillingham, which is the main town on Bristol Bay, tiny place, a couple thousand people during the year. In the summer, during the salmon season, it swells to like 20,000 people. It's amazing. And I'm in a third grade classroom. They're all native kids. They're all indigenous kids. And I said, Dan introduced me. He said, this is my friend Si. He's from the lower 48. He's a songwriter. I've asked him to come here and help spread the word about what's happening. So why don't you tell him what you'd like him to try to put in a song, right? So the first to speak was a young woman who said, my native language is Yupik. I would rather speak Yupik and not know a word of English than speak English and not know my own culture and language, right? And then there was, that at the third grade, the young women are at least a foot taller than the young men. And there was this young guy, he said, okay, Si, here's what you need to know. He said, I killed my first caribou when I was 6 years old. He said, and then when I was 9, I killed my first moose. He said, have you ever seen a moose? I said, not up close. He said, well, they're really big. He said, they're really big. And and we have to butcher them in the field. I mean, you can't put it on your... He says, we're not using dog slings for the small part. We got, those little machines. And he said, but, we butcher them in the field, and we have to... They're places they're inaccessible. So we have to hike back to the village. It's half a dozen or more miles. He said, so it might be 8 or 10 trips. He said, but here's the deal. I'm not hunting for my family. I'm hunting for my village. He said, it is my responsibility when I get back that every family in the village, these villages are maybe 40 or 50 houses, right? He says, every house gets the same amount of the best parts and the worst parts. He said, and then everybody thinks the salmon are so smart. He says, there's actually some pretty stupid salmon. Everybody says, oh, they've returned to where they came from. Not all of them, they get lost. He said, so yeah, he says, yeah. I mean, before the major salmon season hits, he says, then my family will take our boats down the river to the bay. He said, but before that, I go down to the dock and I fish with a rod and reel. He said, the first salmon that I catch, I am required culturally to bring it back to the village, and there is a ceremonial way in which I present this salmon to the village elder. Then I am allowed to go back and fish for my family. So, that becomes the first salmon of the season. I always take and give to someone else. Every game I carry home, I feed others before myself. So, I mean, this is, and if I were an artist, a graphic artist, I might do a design. If I were a quilter, I would do a quilt. If I were a novelist, I might write a book. I am a songwriter, so I create a song. But the songs are true. And then I sent them back and said, cool, yeah, very cool. So I mean, I think that's, and I got to tell you, I love doing this. I really love doing this. It's a useful skill. I believe in being useful, within reason, And then I work very hard to make my political songs story songs about somebody, about somebody's. I one time, and I cannot remember, Larry, because it's been so long, whether I was there personally or whether I heard it from somebody else, but there was a United States Senator named Paul Simon, not that Paul Simon, the United States Senator from Illinois. And I think I was actually there, and this is about the time when the Americans with Disabilities Act was in process, and it wasn't clear whether it'd be, a lot of people were opposed to it. He was holding a public meeting, and somebody said, well, why are you supporting this act? He said, let me tell you about a young man I know. Didn't answer the question. Told the story of a young man who was differently able, humanized it, brought it down to earth. And I think that's, sometimes it's worth doing an abstract political song, but I find, and this is advice I give to other songwriters who are like, I really want to make a difference. I'm like, tell a story, make it about a person. It doesn't matter if they're not a real person. They will be real to the people who are listening. And then make them funny. I mean, We need to laugh. So for this album that became an album called Bristol Bay, we used it as a fun, working with Suzanne Little and Dan Strickland, we built an international organization called Musicians United to Protect Bristol Bay. We got dozens of people to write songs, we did a website. You know, Tret Fury, wonderful, one of the founders of, of the feminist musical movement and a good union woman. Tret, every concert, people say, hey, I heard Tret last night. She talked about Bristol Bay. How do I join up? Right? So people, and she wrote 2 wonderful songs. Tom Chapin wrote a couple of beautiful songs. And as our musicians, members went out and talked about Bristol Bay and sang about Bristol Bay, we reached people. But, but it can't be all serious. This was very serious. This could have poisoned the waters for 1,000 years. It could have thrown like 20,000 people out of work, from the people who fish to the people who are in the packing houses to the people, it would have destroyed the economy that is central to Alaska's survival, and not just of the poorest people. It would destroy a major industry and be an environmental disaster. But I want people to laugh, so I wrote a song called "Everything Is Bigger in Alaska," right? And it's just a, late at night when stars go pale, moon shines on the water, we prop our feet on the starboard rail and drink to the beauty of Alaska, right? And then there's what everything is bigger in Alaska. People laugh, they remember. So I try to do a mix of that. I try to encourage other artists, be funny. Be funny. You could make, if people laugh, they remember.
Great. Thank you.
My pleasure, buddy.